Lanslown show. And returning to the show today is the great Conor Freeman. He's one of our assistant editors at the Libertarian Institute and really one of the most prolific writers on foreign policy from the anti-war perspective that we have right now. Conor, welcome back to the show today. How you doing?
I'm doing great, Kyle. Thanks for having me back on.
Yeah, well, happy to have you here today, Conor. I got one of your articles I want to ask you about first on the West Bank. Also want to talk about Israel is committing a genocide. Trump goes beyond Biden and Europe wanting to fight. So let's start off with this very recent article that you wrote for the Libertarian Institute titled UN Warns of Ethnic Cleansing as West Bank Sees Highest Displacement Figures Since 1967. Conor, I want to bring this up first because when people talk about the plight of the Palestinians for the past 21 months, they're talking about the people of Gaza, and rightfully so. They're being subjected to an active genocide. However, even before October 7th, once this new Israeli government came in December of 2022, the settlers, the violent settlers, have really been emboldened. And with whatever's happening in Gaza, it's covered up as they've terrorized the people of the West Bank. And so now you have some information on that, and I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we can see one example of this, which is it sort of epitomizes the issue. Kyle, we have always discussed the risk of as the genocide progresses in Gaza, it enables Israel to have increased freedom of action in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, to virtually do whatever they want. And what they're doing is displacing tens of thousands of Palestinians and preventing them from returning to their homes. So my article cites several different UN officials just explaining that the basically Operation Iron Wall, which is this war in the northern West Bank, particularly targeting the refugee camps of Jenin, Tulkarem, Farah, and Nur Shams, it's been on autopilot really since January of this year, since Trump came into office. We had this short-lived Witkoff-styled ceasefire in Gaza, which gave Trump some political points at the beginning so that, there wouldn't be an ongoing genocide during his inauguration. But they started a whole new war in the West Bank. And so what we've seen is they're going in there and basically implementing the same tactics that they've been honing in Gaza. So we're seeing attacks, particularly on medical facilities, where they're laying siege to multiple hospitals. They're cutting off roads and people's access to health facilities as they're rampaging and carrying out state terrorism on a grand scale throughout these refugee camps, ripping up water lines, electricity lines, destroying thousands of homes with their bulldozers. They go in and they widen the roads so that there's easier access for military vehicles so they can rapidly deploy forces. And they're to do this, they rip up gardens, homes, and all kinds of other buildings and infrastructure. And it's been it's been such a violent project, but it gets completely out. It's left in the shadows more or less because the media is more focused on what's going on in Gaza or Israel's war bombing Damascus, or it's increasingly taking more territory in Syria, or when they bomb Iran, for instance, or start a war there. But the real project, as is being outlined by Bezalel Smotrich, who is, in a sense, he's definitely one of the most important members of the coalition, because he's not just the finance minister. He has a special position in the defense ministry, which makes him the de facto occupation governor of the West Bank. And in that capacity, he has explained that the entire project here is to basically commit the same sort of project in Gaza in the West Bank, where you destroy people's land, destroy their homes, and make their homeland completely uninhabitable. You kick them out and then you don't let them back in. That's exactly what we're seeing right now. And there's a really good study on this by a British research group called Forensic Architecture.
Well, Conor, one of the things that I've heard the Defense Minister Israel Katz, and people like to try to dismiss Bezalel Smotrich, Itamar Ben-Gvir. Oh, these are just far right ministers, and kind of, they're the extreme, Conor. They don't count, even though they're the part of the ruling coalition that's keeping Benjamin Netanyahu in power. But never mind that, they try to pretend that they don't count. But the person who said that they were going to, I think, do Gazification or Gazify the West Bank was the Defense Minister Israel Katz, who is certainly an extremist, is absolutely crazy. But I think it's important to point out here that he really does represent the consensus of the Israeli government at this point. That they are going to, as you said, rip up the roads. Imagine what would be like in your town if they just went and bulldozed the main road. Could you get to the pharmacy, the grocery store? How much would this disrupt your lives? Would it tear up your car to try to drive on it? I mean, this is what the Gazans are living through every day. And so just how bad is the displacement problem right now in the West Bank, Connor? I mean, obviously it's not Gaza levels, but people are being forced out at this point.
Right. So the numbers that I've been seeing consistently are between 30 and 40,000. Usually, like when I referred to that research paper earlier and the journalism that's been done with looking at satellite imagery and countless videos that are coming out of the West Bank and interviewing witnesses and Palestinians themselves, it's looking like it's 40,000. Although the UN has a slightly lower estimate, they're saying it's 30,000, but that's still massive and like nothing we've seen since the Six-Day War in 1967. And I mean, what Katz actually said was, we're going to teach the lesson of Gaza with repeated raids to the people in the West Bank. And so that's exactly what we're seeing. Kyle, when we started covering Israel's wars on Gaza back in 2021, Operation Guardian of the Walls, one of the things that the Israelis did was they bombed roads to hospitals. And so that is what the Israelis are doing in the West Bank here, only they're doing it with bulldozers that the American taxpayer pays for instead. And I've seen figures where it's about, let's see, I can double check my article, but I know that 3,000 Palestinians have been displaced through ordered home demolitions alone. And also you have thousands of Palestinians who have been displaced by settler violence. And there's no real, I mean, as we can see, we have Mike Huckabee, who's
Hmm.
our ambassador to Israel, who's a vehement supporter of the settler movement and a Christian Zionist. And we just had another American citizen who was beaten to death, murdered by the Israeli settlers. And so he is making some noise about this. Although what they always do, as we've seen with Shireen Abu Akleh, as we saw with Ansar Igi, the Turkish American activist. I apologize if I'm mispronouncing her name, but we always see the Americans give the Israelis the slightest little tap on the wrist and then demand that they investigate themselves, and nothing ever comes of it. And so this is just, it's a continuation of the Biden administration. After Shireen Abu Akleh, an American citizen, a journalist with Al Jazeera for 20 years, was covering a raid in the Jenin refugee camp back in 2022, and an Israeli sniper shot her in the face and killed her. Joe Biden, a couple months later, went to Jerusalem, gave Yair Lapid a big hug, and said, "Our relationship is bone deep, and we make no ifs, ands, or buts about it." And that's Donald Trump's position too. And of course, it comes down. We need the American people to pay more attention to what's going on here, but it's easily overlooked because of just the massive campaign of destruction throughout the entire region that America is underwriting and that Israel is leading right now. And so the displacement is out of control, but it's really a combined assault of the IDF and the settlers. And when the settlers rampage through these villages and towns, they're always protected by the IDF. I mean, they can shoot Palestinians, they can throw rocks at them, they can burn their houses down, they can destroy their cars, they can destroy their property. And yet, if the Palestinian youth, as they're referred to, when you read these reports out of Wafa or any sort of Middle Eastern outlet, you always hear that the IDF comes out and starts shooting at the youth. I mean, they want these people completely. They're not able to arm themselves. There's no Hamas like group in the West Bank. You have Palestinian Islamic Jihad and a little bit, but and some brave resistance groups in the West Bank, little pockets. But it's not anything like what we've seen in Gaza. And
Hmm.
the Hamas can't defend the people of Gaza either. So it's just another. It's not a. It's. I hate to call it a war, but I think it's an ancillary to the genocidal ethnic cleansing policy. It's a war on Palestine, not just on Gaza.
Yeah, I think Bezalel Smotrich once said the option for the Palestinians in the West Bank was going to be subjugation, emigration, or death. And I mean that's just incredibly dark. Connor, we do have quite a few people watching live, well over 600 now. So if you are one of the people watching us on X or YouTube, share out the show, help us out. If you're watching on YouTube, be sure to subscribe and go ahead and leave us a comment in the live chat. Let us know what you think of the show, ideas for future guests, any questions that we could clear up. Now, Connor, I have this clip I want to play from you. It's from a somewhat famous American actor. He was in shows like Homeland and Criminal Minds, so I think most people will recognize him. And this is what he had to say about the situation in Israel.
And I ask Jews all over the world to consider what this man, Benjamin Netanyahu, and his right-wing government is doing to the Jewish people all over the world. They are endangering not only the state of Israel, which I care deeply about and want to exist, but they are endangering the Jewish population all over the world. He is the most dangerous thing, not just since October 7th. It has been a deeply troubled situation for the Jewish people to allow this to happen to children and civilians of all ages in Gaza for whatever reason is unconscionable and unthinkable. And I ask you Jews everywhere all over the world to spend some time alone and think, is this acceptable and sustainable? How could it be done to you and your ancestors, and you turn around and you do it to someone else?
Yeah.
Yeah, it is very powerful. I've only seen a little bit of that. I did not see the end of it where he starts shaking with his righteous anger there. I'm very glad to hear it. You know, I never really mentioned this, but I've got some Jewish background myself, and you know, I really don't fear anti-Semitism or this kind of thing. I mean, most of it is so blown out of proportion in order to cover up. You know, really the control that the Israel lobby has over our government and to a larger extent our media and society. But you know, I totally understand his point. I'm not really concerned about the future of Israel so much. I would like to see it at a minimum become a democratic state with one man, one vote, and equal rights for every citizen. But it, you know, Netanyahu's policies and the policies of the successive Israeli regimes that I've been covering just in the last 5 years have absolutely made the world a less safe place for Jews. And there's perhaps no less safe place for Jews than Israel now. And this is just the you know, you could have predicted this. This is the outcome of the Zionist project. I mean, how the hell can you go to war with Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, Iran, go to war in the West Bank, commit a genocide in Gaza? How can you do all these things concurrently and expect to keep the Jews safe? It's just completely, you know, it doesn't make any sense. And it is a repudiation of this, you know, slogan, never forget or never again. This is a absolute, this is the, you can't think of a better sort of analogy. This is the Holocaust of our time. There's no doubt about it. And we see things like, you know, every American doctor. We've seen hundreds of American doctors, surgeons, and nurse practitioners go to Gaza, and they say every single day there's little kids, toddlers, like below 10 and 11, coming in with bullets in their heads from snipers and in their chest, and they all say the same thing. This is only happening deliberately. So you have the IDF out there having their fun. I mean, they're just shooting little kids in the head. And I hate to emphasize the children because, you know, I've read some Palestinian writers who make a wonderful, a very important point, I think, which is that when we do emphasize, you know, the women and children, which of course, you know, that is, you know, very emotional for anybody paying attention to this. But Palestinian men absolutely have a right to exist and have a right to defend themselves just like any other human being. And so this idea that we can, you know, and we hear this logic that, well, Hamas refuses to give up the hostages. Well, suppose they released all the hostages right now. Now, on the one hand, they would have no leverage for negotiations, but it doesn't appear that the hostages amount to much leverage at all in the first place. Now, even if they did,
To have
exactly.
any weight in the negotiations. But go ahead, Connor.
Well, we would just see a continuation of the genocide, and it would lay bare the fact that this is essentially a Nazi regime. And this is no better than what we saw in the Holocaust. Gaza is a death camp. The fact, you were just covering on the last show that 1 in 10 kids is now
Mhm.
facing malnutrition. And we have these other statistics. I know just in June alone, something like over almost 5,800 children were diagnosed with at the remaining health facilities that are even vaguely operating still. They are they have these children that come in with 1,000 cases at least of severe malnutrition and over nearly 6,000 cases of malnutrition. And these are just little kids who are starving to death and dying. And if they go outside, they may just get a bullet in the head from some IDF soldier who's going to have a laugh with his friends and maybe film it. I mean, this is the most sick thing that anybody is doing in the world today. And every single bit of it, as Kyle, you've written up many times at the Institute, 70% of every dollar or shekel spent on this genocide comes from the American taxpayer. And that goes for the wars against Israel's neighbors as well. But, we should be very careful about this. It's not just a threat to Jews and the future of Israel. It's a threat to every single American because we're implicated in every single one of these murders. And, quite frankly, Americans still haven't learned the lessons of 9/11. The reason why you had 19 mostly Saudi and Egyptian hijackers who decided to go and kill thousands of Americans by becoming kamikaze pilots was largely and certainly primarily really a result of U.S. support for Israel and their brutal wars and occupations in southern Lebanon, the West Bank, and the Gaza Strip. And nothing has changed because, as we can see with Donald Trump, when he launches a war against Iran and leaves tens of thousands of American troops vulnerable to counterattack and ballistic missile fire, they don't care about Americans. They care about Israel. They care about the Israel lobby and the military-industrial complex. And that's Trump's MO.
Yeah. Well, excellent points there, Connor. And I wish we could stay ahead all day and we could talk about all this stuff going on with the Palestinians. But I do want to turn our attention to Ukraine because as bad as the outcomes could be for the Palestinians and blowback terrorism for the U.S., the risk of nuclear war, I do think, is going up with Ukraine. President Donald Trump comes into office making all these promises about ending the war. But now we have this very disturbing article from the Financial Times. Donald Trump asked Zelensky if Ukraine could hit Moscow. People briefed on call. And the article explains Donald Trump has privately encouraged Ukraine to step up deep strikes on Russian territory, even asking Zelensky whether he could strike Moscow if the U.S. provided long-range weapons. According to people briefed on the discussions, this is what Trump said. Vladimir, can you hit Moscow? Can you hit St. Petersburg? Trump asked on the call, according to the People. And Zelensky said, absolutely, if you give us the weapons. And so, Connor, I remember not that long ago, we had Donald Trump criticizing Joe Biden for making the same decision. This is an article from Voice of America just a few months ago. Trump criticizes the decision to allow Ukraine to strike inside Russia and says, I disagree very vehemently with sending missiles hundreds of miles into Russia. Why are we doing that? We're just escalating this war and making it worse. That should not have been allowed to be done, Trump said in an interview with Time magazine published on December 12th. And so, Connor, when do you think Trump has it right? Now or back in December?
Back in December. However, if you look at Donald Trump's record, we really shouldn't be surprised by this.
Mm-hmm.
He says that I got to say, I did laugh because as I was reading the BBC report where the White House was trying to deny this report in Financial Times, they said, no, but he was merely asking a question. And Donald Trump is working tirelessly around the clock to stop the killing and end the war. And it reminded me of that stock line we had heard about Kamala Harris when she was running for president. Oh, I know Kamala's on Call Her Daddy and doing these ridiculous campaign speeches where she's clearly on Xanax, but she's working timelessly around the clock to achieve a ceasefire in Gaza. They don't respect the intelligence of the American people. And Trump, quite frankly, we know from Peter Navarro, his main guy on trade in the first administration, that he was willing to commit a genocide in Yemen, the poorest Middle Eastern country, in order to boost the stock prices of the price of stock shares from Raytheon, because he sees it as good for the American economy, which is totally ridiculous. But when you have the Trump base going, well, Trump is, Daddy Trump is really putting NATO into shape. No, he's not. He's getting them to spend, allegedly, they're pledging sort of to spend, well, let's see what happens. But in the next 10 years, they're going to spend 5% of their GDP on weapons. That's just to benefit the American military industrial complex. And that's all Trump has really ever cared about when he talks smack about NATO, right? If you look at Donald Trump's record, he tore up the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty. He tore up the Open Skies Treaty. He tried to kill New START, which Biden's war effectively killed. Subsequently, he set records for the number of sanctions he imposed on Russia and the number of Russian diplomats he expelled. He's the one who started sending lethal aid to Ukraine and funded the war on the Donbass for virtually his entire first administration, killing thousands of civilians. And he has often bragged to donors about how he has threatened to bomb Moscow himself, to bomb Beijing himself, as a threat to both Putin and Xi about Ukraine and Taiwan, respectively. He's got a real fetish for war, and no one really likes to talk about it, but it's true. And so, I'm not surprised that he's betraying his base here. Witkoff, quite frankly, I don't understand all the hype. I haven't seen one single success yet from this supposedly brilliant negotiator and ostensible diplomat. Hasn't accomplished anything. I didn't expect him to. And, the fact that Trump is saying things like this, I don't know if he's just trying to intimidate Putin or something, but I don't see them giving Tomahawk missiles to Kiev, which is what
No,
they
and that
need to hit
Financial
Moscow.
Times article actually did add, Connor, that was one of the things Ukraine had requested and the Trump administration had denied.
Yeah.
But it doesn't seem like there's a real kind of logical gap here where Donald Trump has, and by the way, we have over 1,000 people watching live now. So if you are watching live, help share this out. Maybe we could get to 2,000 before we wrap up here. But Connor, Trump has always been hyper focused on the idea that we're spending more money. It's hundreds of billions of dollars of American weapons. And certainly, I hate that we spent all this money fueling this proxy war in Ukraine that only got more Ukrainians killed. But the real limitation, the real issue that the Pentagon is identifying, the real problem that they say we have is simply we don't have missiles left in our stockpiles. Right? We don't have more Patriots. We don't have more artillery rounds. We can't make enough. We make 500 Patriots a year. We probably use that many to help Israel over 12 days. It's simply not a sustainable project to continue to arm and fund Ukraine. And yet Trump seems giddy to send more weapons to Ukraine now that he could pretend that somebody else is paying for it, which, it all seems like a very questionable scheme anyways, that, it's really going to be the Europeans and not the Americans paying for this. So your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, it's another sort of example of the fact that Donald Trump is not a realist. He's not an anomaly here in terms of the presidents we've seen in both of our lifetimes. He more or less follows the formula, right? He can't roll back our war on Russia that's been building up for decades and decades and has so much. The establishment is so invested in this project of weakening Russia and basically crippling them in, really so that we can go to war with China more confidently. That he can't roll that back. And also he can't decide, what am I supposed to back Israel to the hilt while they go to war with Iran and potentially get US troops, killed by the tens of thousands? I guess I'll have to if that's what Netanyahu wants. But at the same time, I want to pivot to Asia. Well, I don't have enough. We just don't have the money. We don't have the resources. We don't have the weapons to do this. But then here he comes Trump, Mr. I'm going to cut the military budget to 500 billion and make a deal with Russia and China so that we can reduce global military spending. No, actually, I'm going to spend over $1 trillion on the military, and that's what we're going to do instead. And I'm going to continue escalating with China. I'm going to continue escalating with Russia and continue escalating with Iran. And who knows what's going to happen with North Korea? But this is really just more proof that Donald Trump, he might not be a neocon himself, but he has so many neocons and neocon adjacent figures in his cabinet, just like last time, that preclude him from doing the right thing, even if he ever wanted to, which it doesn't seem obvious. It doesn't seem clear at all that that's the case. Really, what are they going to do? They're going to produce air defense munitions and precision rockets and artillery and sell it to the Europeans, and then the Europeans are going to send it to Ukraine and then buy more from you. This is just a corporate welfare project, and he doesn't care how many hundreds of thousands of Russians and Ukrainians die, or the fact that, as you've pointed out, Kyle, you and Will at the Institute, the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists now has been saying that we're closer to nuclear war than we ever have been beyond the Cuban Missile Crisis. And so all of his talk about, the nuclear, like it needs to be addressed and we want to reduce nuclear weapons, that's not his plan. He has no intention of returning to New START or renegotiating an alternative. He just wants to continue Obama's project of building up for war with China, continue the Ukraine project, and, spend trillions of dollars revamping and modernizing our nuclear triad.
Yeah, so Connor, I want to wrap up here. I have one more clip to play for you. This is Donald Trump explaining that, no, really, the Europeans want to fight this war, so he's just going to let them do it.
We have one country that has 17 Patriots getting ready to be shipped. They're not going to need them for them. So we're going to work a deal where the 17 will go, or a big portion of the 17 will go to the war side. I have to tell you, Europe has a lot of spirit for this war. A lot of people, when I first got involved, I really didn't think they did, but they do. The level of esprit de corps, spirit that they have is amazing. They really think it's a very, very important thing to do, or they wouldn't be doing it. Look, they're agreeing to, they're paying for everything. We're not paying anymore. We have an ocean separating us. I said, we have a problem. We make the best stuff, but we can't keep doing this. Again, I said it before, this is not Trump's war. We're here to try and get it finished and settled and whatever. Because nobody wins with this. This is a loser from every standpoint.
From day
this
one.
was Biden and this was other people.
The level of contempt he has for his base is baffling. It's truly flabbergasting. So it's Biden's war, not Trump's war. So I'm sure he'll be saying that in 2027 and 2028 as well, when the war is still ongoing and we're still spending hundreds of billions of dollars. And also the European esprit de corps, really, hundreds of thousands of Ukraine. We've destroyed a generation of Ukrainian men. The country is covered in cluster bombs, depleted uranium munitions. It's the most heavily mined country on the planet. What exactly is the esprit? What are we talking about? The special operations troop that are training these guys safely in their own countries, these draftees. It's just, it's insane that he can say this with a straight face, and he's walking back all of his commitments. He said he was going to end Biden's war. The whole pitch that we heard from people about why Trump was preferable to Kamala Harris was that he doesn't want World War III. But apparently, if Mark Rutte, kisses his ass and flatters him enough, he's liable to do absolutely anything. Even talk about openly, just to be, cheeky, to talk about bombing Moscow and St. Petersburg. This is just a complete, he does not care. It's just like the Epstein thing. Well, my past supporters are obsessed with this child sex trafficking ring, and I don't care about it. Look, Jeff was a big friend of mine for 15 years, but he's a creep. I don't want to talk about him anymore, and you shouldn't either. And they expect people to just swallow this and go on like lemmings. But thankfully, the Trump base is resisting this, but he's going to give them a hell of a lot more reasons to. And they think that they can get away with just insulting the intelligence of the American people, continuing to take their money and imposing further surveillance measures over them while we're immiserated on behalf of foreign nations. And that was ostensibly what Trump was running against. But it's very clear. It's won't get fooled again. It's the meet the new boss, same as the old boss. And that's the best thing for America, to realize that Donald Trump is not an anomaly, and more radical, radical political alternatives are what are needed right now. And I don't care if that's the anti-war left or the libertarians or the America First movement, the sincere America First movement on the right, but we should all get together and repudiate all this and really challenge them forcefully. But in the meantime, Trump is just going to continue to prove us right.
Well, Conor, let's wrap on this question. So I think you're right there that Trump is just constantly, like, day after day after day, spitting in the face of his own base now. Promises, things that people really cared about, like finding out what was going on and who was on the Jeffrey Epstein client list, and living in a nation that does hold pedophiles accountable is a message that really resonates with people, and particularly with conservatives. Ending needless wars and at least getting out of Middle East conflicts, again, messages that really resonated with conservatives. And now Trump has gone the opposite direction on all three of those issues. Now, certainly there's a lot of Laura Loomer and Tim Pools out there that are just going to lap up whatever the White House puts out and are just going to tell their audience that, trust the plan, like Trump is doing the right thing. He's, manipulating the narrative in this way or that way. But I see a lot of people very skeptical of what's going on here. So I'm wondering what you think.
I think that's true. And people are getting that, you can't really insult people and drag them through the mud constantly without finally somebody standing up and saying, hey, enough of this. I want to be treated with respect, and I don't believe in this anymore. And I think that's what's going to happen here. You can see it even with like Tucker Carlson and other figures like that. They're loath to attack Trump too directly, but they're really undermining his administration and the confidence the base has in this current White House. And that's important. And we can see the fact that, really, they just defunded NPR today, and JD Vance is marching around patting himself on the back for that. Well, they've privatized state media through these social media influencers and big podcasters like you're talking about, right, Kyle. So, they don't need NPR. I guess we won't need it until a Democrat wins again. But, this is just like with Biden, right? Genocide Joe destroyed the Democratic Party. We saw their AstroTurf class revolt against them in the midst of their existential battle for the fate of American democracy with Orange Hitler. And now we're going to see the Trump base revolt, hopefully, against Trump himself. And not in favor of the other side, but in favor of a better future for America of peace and prosperity, like Ron Paul talked about. And that's our fight.
All right, Conor, thank you so much for coming on the show today. Everybody, that is Conor Freeman. He is the assistant editor at the Libertarian Institute, one of my co-hosts on conflicts of interest, and just one of the most knowledgeable sources on foreign policy today. Conor, thank you so much for coming on the show, and we'll have to do it again soon.
Thank you, Kyle. Looking forward to it.